There's an old saying in the town of Brimstone Creek, not all doors lead to a place you're meant to go. It's a phrase that sends shivers down the spines of the townsfolk, especially those who know the legend of the McAllister Manor. The manor was a sprawling, Gothic structure, sitting on the edge of town like a dark sentinel. Its pointed towers and cracked, moss-covered walls loomed over the dense forest that surrounded it. Most people avoided the manor, but for as long as anyone could remember, rumors swirled about what lay behind the heavy oak door at the back of the house, the last door that no one was ever meant to open. The story begins with Emily, a curious 25-year-old woman with a taste for adventure. Emily had just moved to Brimstone Creek from the city, drawn by the town's eerie charm and its promise of a slower, simpler life. But she was not like the others. She didn't believe in ghost stories or curses. To her, the legends were nothing more than tales spun to keep children in line. So when she heard whispers about the McAllister Manor, her curiosity was piqued. She knew she had to see it for herself. It was a dreary autumn afternoon when Emily set out for the manor. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, threatening rain, and the wind carried a cold bite that made the leaves dance in eerie patterns. As she approached the mansion, a sense of foreboding washed over her, but she brushed it aside, determined to uncover the secrets hidden within. The front doors of the manor were surprisingly easy to push open, creaking on their ancient hinges as if they hadn't been used in decades. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. The grand foyer was just as she had imagined. Ornate chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their crystals dull and coated with grime, and a grand staircase wound up into the shadows. But Emily wasn't interested in the grandeur. She was here for the door. She made her way through the manor, passing by rooms filled with old, decaying furniture covered in sheets, their once vibrant colors faded to shades of gray. The floorboards groaned under her weight, and the sound echoed through the halls like a distant, ominous warning. Despite the cold, sweat began to bead on her forehead. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, but she was too deep into her mission to turn back now. Finally, she found it, the last door, tucked away in a narrow corridor at the back of the house. It was an unremarkable door, plain and wooden, with a brass handle tarnished by time. But there was something about it, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The door seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, waiting for her. For a moment, Emily hesitated. She thought about the stories, the warnings from the townsfolk. But then she shook her head, convincing herself that it was all nonsense. With a deep breath, she reached out and grasped the handle. It was cold to the touch, colder than anything she had ever felt before, as if it had been locked in ice for centuries. She turned it slowly. The sound of the latch clicking open was louder than it should have been, almost like a scream in the quiet hallway. The door swung open with a creak, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she peered into the void, the darkness seeming to swallow the light from the hallway behind her. She took out her flashlight and shone it inside. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the earth. Every instinct screamed at her to close the door and leave, but her curiosity was stronger. She stepped inside, the wooden stairs groaning under her weight. As she descended, the air grew colder, and a musty, earthy smell filled her nostrils, like the scent of something long buried. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself in a narrow stone corridor, the walls damp and slick with moisture. The light from her flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that danced on the walls like restless spirits. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, but she pressed forward, her footsteps echoing off the stone, the sound growing louder with each step. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the end of the corridor. Another door stood before her, this one larger and made of heavy iron, rusted and pitted with age. Unlike the door above, this one bore no handle, no keyhole, only a strange, intricate symbol etched into the metal, a symbol that seemed to writhe and twist as she looked at it. As she stared at the symbol, a low hum began to fill the air, growing louder and more intense until it felt like it was vibrating through her bones. Her head began to throb, a sharp pain stabbing through her temples. But she couldn't look away. The symbol drew her in, pulling her closer until she was standing right in front of the door, her hand reaching out to touch the cold, rough surface. The moment her fingers brushed the symbol, the door began to move. It slid open with a grinding, metallic sound, revealing a room beyond that was completely different from the damp, dark corridor. The room was vast, The walls lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts, ancient books bound in leather, jars filled with murky liquids, and odd trinkets that seemed to glow with an inner light. In the center of the room was a large stone altar, and on it lay an old, leather-bound book. The pages were yellowed with age, and strange symbols were scrawled across them in a language she couldn't understand. But the moment she saw it, she knew it was the source of the power she had felt, the dark presence that permeated the manor. Against her better judgment, Emily approached the altar. The air around her grew heavy, thick with an unseen force that pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. But she couldn't stop herself. She reached out and touched the book. The moment her fingers made contact, the room seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, and the hum in the air grew deafening. The book's pages began to turn on their own, flipping rapidly until they stopped on a page filled with an elaborate drawing, a drawing of the very door she had just opened. Beneath the drawing was a warning, written in bold, blood-red letters: some doors should never be opened. Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her with a force that shook the entire room. The shelves rattled, and the jars and trinkets clattered to the floor, shattering into pieces. The room grew darker, the light from her flashlight fading until it was nothing more than a dim glow. Panic set in as Emily realized she was trapped. She ran to the door, pounding on it with her fists, but it wouldn't budge. The darkness closed in around her, and she could feel something in the room with her, something ancient and malevolent. It whispered to her, in a language she couldn't understand, but the intent was clear: it was hungry, and it had been waiting for her. As the whispers grew louder, Emily felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She spun around, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness and the weight of the presence that surrounded her. The hand gripped tighter, and she felt herself being pulled backward, away from the door, away from any hope of escape. Her screams echoed through the manor, but no one was there to hear them. The townsfolk of Brimstone Creek had long learned to ignore the sounds that came from the old McAllister Manor, for they knew that once the last door was opened, it could never be closed again. As the darkness consumed her, Emily's last thoughts were of regret that she hadn't listened, that she had let her curiosity lead her to this place, this room, this door. But it was too late. The door had been opened, and now it would claim what it had been waiting for all these years. And so, the legend of the McAllister Manor grew, another tale to be whispered among the townsfolk, a warning to those who might dare to follow in Emily's footsteps. For in Brimstone Creek, everyone knows that some doors are meant to remain closed, and once you open them, there is no turning back.